Have you ever had a thought that frightened you? Not because of what was happening around you, but because of what was happening inside your own head. You're not so much afraid of the content of that thought, but you're afraid of the fact you had it in the first place. But what if the problem was never the thought itself? What if it was the meaning you attached to it? And what if it turns out that all this time you've just been reacting to something that you really didn't need to be concerned about at all? Welcome back to my channel. I'm Tim Box, mind coach and anxiety specialist. And today I want to talk about anxious thoughts. Not how to stop them or challenge them. In fact, probably the exact opposite of that. How to allow them without having to be frightened of them. So I've been working one-to-one with anxiety clients for about 15 years now. And when people come to see me with anxiety issues, they'll often explain to me that their thoughts are the big problem. They'll often describe these thoughts as intrusive, as if they've metaphorically kicked the door down and taken up residence in their head completely uninvited. But the more I've worked with anxious people, the more I've come to realize something. The problem is rarely the thought they're having. The problem is what they think the thought says about them and their own mental and emotional health. If you've stopped into some of my live streams, then you might have on occasion heard me talk about my university days studying philosophy. Now, full disclosure, I really wasn't very good at philosophy, but one of the books I actually really enjoyed studying was Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy. In this book, René Descartes sought to attain absolute undeniable certainty about the world and our place in it. To do this, he needed to establish a bedrock, a foundation belief, something that was universally true and couldn't be challenged. So he basically chose to doubt literally everything that he possibly could as he sought out that which he couldn't possibly doubt. Along the way, he questioned whether he could trust his senses. He questioned whether the world around him was real. He questioned whether anything existed at all. Eventually, he found something he couldn't possibly doubt: his own existence. You probably know the famous conclusion he arrived at: I think, therefore I am. This position is called solipsism, where you choose to doubt everything except the existence of your own mind. You know only this: you exist as something that thinks. Even if every thought you have might be wrong, you at the very least know you are a thinking thing to even be having those thoughts. Now, whenever students first encounter this idea, they often level the same criticism at Descartes. They'll say, if Descartes genuinely doubted the existence of everything except his own mind, why did he bother writing a book about it? Who did he think was going to read it? Now, this sounds like a really clever argument to a first-year philosophy student. And if you're about to embark upon a philosophy degree, then close your ears because the next bit contains spoilers. It isn't a clever argument at all. You see, Descartes wasn't terrified by these thoughts. He wasn't lying awake at night wondering whether reality was collapsing, because ultimately he wasn't describing things he thought to be true. He was engaged in what we might call a philosophical exercise. He was exploring an idea. He was approaching it with curiosity. Thoughts about the truth behind our existence might seem kind of scary if we fear having those thoughts or what they mean. If we take every fantastical notion as accurate and an indicator of truth, then it would make sense to be afraid of having any thought that was a bit out there or challenging. We could even frighten ourselves by wondering what on earth has caused us to think such scary things and entertain such troubling notions. But of course, in Descartes' case, none of those thoughts were entertained with anything other than curiosity. So the thoughts themselves weren't a problem because he wasn't afraid of what they meant. Before we go any further, have you checked out the members area of this channel? In there, you'll find hours and hours of extra anxiety and mind coaching content, including my full control system training and the Clear Your Head Anxiety Relief Program. You'll also get full access to exclusive weekly live Q&As. It's just £9 for a full month's access, and you can join by hitting the button on the homepage or clicking the link in the description of this video. See you there. Compare Descartes' philosophical exercise to how many people treat anxious thoughts. A thought appears such as, what if this never gets better? Immediately we react, not just to the possibility itself, but to the fact that we had the thought. We start asking, why am I thinking this? What does this mean? Should I be worried? And now we've created a second problem. The original thought might have lasted a few seconds, but our reaction to it can last a lot longer. One of the strangest assumptions we make as human beings is that every thought we have must be important, as though every idea that enters our mind deserves a committee meeting. But that's clearly not true. Human beings think all sorts of strange, random, and even contradictory things. We have ideas about doing things we'd never in a million years actually do. We imagine things happening that would be horrifying if they actually occurred. But the reason for this is not that we have some sort of warped or broken mental process going on. This isn't our mind malfunctioning. Quite the opposite. Our mind's job is to constantly be coming up with every possible scenario based on what we already understand about the world, so we can plan our next steps forward. And whilst most of these thousands and thousands of thoughts vanish without even arriving in our conscious awareness, some of them we notice. But these thoughts aren't the problem. The problem is how we feel about having them. All too often we treat every random notion that pops into our conscious awareness as if it says something about the future, about ourselves, or about our state of mind. But put simply, the fact that you can think something doesn't make it true. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you for thinking it, and it certainly doesn't flag it up as something worth worrying about. I should say at this point in the video that I'm not attempting to get you to simply ignore these thoughts. Of course you could, after all, there's nothing threatening about them. You could very safely pay them no mind at all. But the opposite of anxiety isn't apathy, and the opposite of fear isn't indifference. Just because something isn't of threat doesn't necessarily mean it isn't of interest. Often our journey the other side of high anxiety and fear takes us through that thing that all philosophers have an abundance of: curiosity. A highly anxious mind asks, in what way is this thought a threat? A curious mind asks, I wonder why I'm thinking that. One approach creates fear, the other seeks understanding. And this is what so many people eventually discover. When they stop fearing their anxious thoughts, the thoughts themselves lose much of their power. Not because they disappeared or were defeated in some way, but because they stopped being perceived as an indicator of something terrible. The thoughts were never the threat. It was the fear of the thoughts that was the problem. At that point, we are free to discover that it's perfectly safe to think about fearful things and to explore thoughts about anxiety and how it works without reacting as if those thoughts are true. You might have spent a lot of time and energy trying to not think about your own anxiety response through fear that it will inevitably trigger high anxiety. But the simple truth is, you don't need to hide from anxious thoughts. You don't need to silence them, and you don't need to in some way try to prove them wrong. Sometimes the most helpful thing you can do is simply allow them to be heard. If you listen without panic and explore your thoughts without fear, you might just discover that you never needed to be afraid of them in the first place. If the ideas discussed in this video are resonating with you and you'd like my personal guidance to help you get the other side of anxiety, then follow the link in the description of this video to book a free, no obligation consultation. And if you found this video helpful, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for weekly videos on anxiety and understanding how the mind works. But that's it for this one. I'm Tim Box. Always remember, be kind to your mind, and I'll see you next time.